Good morning, everyone. Well, we want to welcome you to day 2 of our colloquium on gender-based violence, theme Eradicating Gender-Based Violence and Harassment. And the question that we asked ourselves yesterday, which we will continue and attempt to answer today, is, are we doing enough to eradicate gender-based violence in South Africa? We were privileged to have a diverse group of presenters and respondents that spoke to us yesterday. And we now have an idea of what GBV is, what the impacts are. But the question still remains, are we doing enough? Are we getting something wrong? What are we doing right? And what can we improve on to eliminate gender-based violence, protecting our women and our children as we celebrate Women's Month? Thank you for returning, and we thank our guests that are coming in for the first time. We also want to appreciate all our presenters this morning. Thank you, thank you. Without further ado, I would like to introduce to you Professor Manigay Reddy, the Dean of the Law School at UKZN, who is based in Howard College. Prof. Manigay, over to you.
Thank you very much, Victoria. The Director of Proceedings and my colleague in the School of Law, Ms. Victoria Balogun-Fatokun, the Honorable Ms. Nontembo Boyce, Speaker of the UKZN Legislature, Ms. Asya Khan, representing the Department of Justice, Ms. Busisiwe Ramabodu, representing the Human Resources Division at UKZN, Ms. Palesa Mololo, a postgraduate student at UKZN, Ms. Jui Hansraj, an LLB student at UKZN and the Unicef student representative, Mr. Batandwa Imki of the UKZN SRC, and our dearest ladies and gentlemen and students. On 9th August 1995, when the National Women's Day was celebrated in South Africa for the first time, women all over the country were delighted at what we imagined the celebration will herald for us. We anticipated that by being recognized in this way, our position as perpetual second-class human beings and all the woes that this status inflicted on us would change. We expected that respect for our womanhood would grow and that the violence visited upon our bodies would abate and that we could finally begin to enjoy the right to self-determination. So we celebrated that day deliriously. How foolishly blinded we were by the pageantry of having a day dedicated to women. Regrettably, the celebration of women by awarding us one day in the year has done little in changing the quality of most women's lives in South Africa when it comes to our experience of violence. If anything, it would seem that the depiction of August as Women's Month triggers in men the most vicious and barbaric forms of violence against women, especially in this month. No one seems to be able to influence the brutes who live amongst us to get them to rethink their views on women and to stop the brutality to which they are daily subjecting millions of women in South Africa. However, that does not mean that we must simply keel over and give up the fight to stop gender-based violence. It is through small steps like this webinar today and yesterday that we will eventually be able to stem the violence against women. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm extremely proud to mention that today's webinar, which is part 2 of a 2-day program, is the brainchild of our law student, Mr. Batandwa Imki. If more men could emulate Mr. Imki's example by making the eradication of GBV their problem and a project requiring their action, what a marvelous impact this will have in solving the problem of GBV. So, dearest ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the School of Law and the College of Law and Management Studies, I would like to very warmly and lovingly welcome you to this important and necessary webinar. Thank you for joining us and our wonderful panelists today as they look at all aspects of relevance in eradicating this dreadful GBV pandemic, which has afflicted so many women so badly for far too long. I thank you. Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you, Professor Reddy. What a deep speech. And we hope that the content can minister to those that feel that violence is always the way, regardless of who the recipient is, even at a state of vulnerability. We really appreciate your leadership. We thank you for your support, and we actually look forward to more productive collaborations. Thank you very much, Prof. Looking at our program, you will see that we have excellent speakers and respondents lined up. And we will be speaking to one thing which is common. Once again, GBV. How did we get here? Where do we go from here? Are we comfortable? I don't want to think so, but you will be the judge. Yesterday, we were joined by Honorable Shaman from the minority front, and also a former member of the KZN legislature. We were also privileged to have with us Advocate Mashini Naidu, Prophetess Nomusa Blomo, and amongst our respondents, we were joined by Professor Rilebule Maletani, the Pro Vice Chancellor for Social Cohesion, the J.L. Dube Professor in Rural Education, and we had an international guest, Barrister Moyosore Olabinter, a lawyer who specializes in international development and women's affairs. One of the things that came up yesterday, if I may just take us through a quick recap, whether questions of, did we ask for GBV? But we realized from all the presentation that it seems like no one actually deserves it, and it is something that is ongoing. We also realized that it is linked also to some of our backgrounds, which could have fueled it. And above all, people not talking about it. So we are not comfortable talking about gender-based violence, despite its exclusion and the targeting of a particular minority or vulnerable group, which is often women and children. Of course, some men also get trapped in it, but from the statistics that we saw yesterday, it seems like women and children are more on the receiving end. Some of the questions or the concerns that were raised were whether we have enough law reforms or legal frameworks that are addressing this issue. The debate will continue today, as we can see. Do we need more laws? Do we have enough laws? Is it an issue of morality? We don't know. Are we getting comfortable not talking about it? Or do we have to get uncomfortable not talking about it? These were some of the things that we talked about yesterday. The roles of the law, the roles that the people and communities at large must play. Are we raising our boys wrongly? Are mothers, in the way they're raising their boys, indirectly or negligently or ignorantly fueling GBV? Telling a grown man not to batter a woman when a boy is used to being battered or seeing other people being battered? Should we revisit our homes and get comfortable saying no to bad conduct? Looking at the role of the church, one of the points that was made was that there could also be some kind of bad attitude that is fueling GBV, like some traditional attitude that we are comfortable with. And we say, it is my culture, it is my tradition, this is my religion. Do we need to go back and investigate? Are we going to upset some people And if we're going to be upsetting people, who are we going to be upsetting? Or is it about time that we do not care who's upset and we still do what we need to do? We also realized through the discussions that early marriages and forced marriages are subjecting women and girls to GBV, economic incapacitation, lack of men forums, and poor awarenesses around our schools can also be some of the problems that we are having today. We only talked about the 16 days of activism. Shouldn't women be prioritized throughout the year? Is there a role for education? Can an educated person be subjected to GBV? These were all the questions that we were asking ourselves yesterday. Some we were able to answer, some were not able to. Others we will be building on today as we go along. So without me delaying the discussion any further, just as we were blessed yesterday, again today, we have been specially blessed, favored, as we have amongst us today, Honorable Montebeko Boyce, who happens to be the current Speaker of the KZN legislature. This is heavy. She's super busy, but despite her busy schedule, she has prioritized the affairs of women and children in this province and in our nation. And she is taking a big, bold step against GBV. And she is here with us today. So if you've got questions, start preparing your questions and getting them ready. So I am honored to introduce our first speaker this morning, Honorable Boyce. The floor is yours, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Director of Proceedings, Advocate Balogan. Greetings to the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Prof. Brian MacArthur, to the Dean and Head of the School of Law in the UKZN, Professor Reddy, to Ms. Asiya Khan from the Department of Justice, the leadership of students that are here, both the postgrad students that are representing others, but also importantly, the SRC representative, Mr. Bathandwa Mki, as well as my colleague, Honorable Shamir Thakur Rajbansi, my sister, and the members of the executive. Greetings. Firstly, Program Director of Proceedings, I would like to appreciate the opportunity that I was given by the University of KwaZulu-Natal to be part of the contributors to your colloquium today, especially on a topic that is as crucial and heavy as gender-based violence. As we are closing the month that is known as Women's Month in our country, the month where we celebrate and denote the role that was played by women, that continue to be played by women, but importantly, a month where we get to speak and reflect honestly about things that are not allowing for the progress of women in South Africa. Amongst them and top of them is gender-based violence. As a legislature, which is an institution at your disposal in the province, we value to have this opportunity because this also speaks to our own responsibilities that we have in terms of the constitution, public participation and involvement that we have to encourage. So when we are meeting here today, especially with you, we will be learning from you, but also we will also be guided because we are also responsible for the legislative framework in the province. And it will be a consultation that will assist us to have impact-based lawmaking as we ensure that government departments deliver quality services to the people. In the spirit of public involvement, we always try to make ourselves available to engage with every sector of society on issues of provincial and national importance. We do this because one of our strategic objectives is to work through formidable and strategic partnerships with citizens, communities, and civil society organizations. We also want to have a formidable partnership with the University of KwaZulu-Natal, especially the College of Law, as we move forward to assist us with making those impactful laws in the legislature. I know that I am called now to speak about the role that government is playing in eradicating gender-based violence, if there is any. But I think that it will be important for me to first, before going to saying whether government or the state has been able to turn the tide regarding gender-based violence in our country, go to the oldest and simplest justification for the existence of the state, which has always been to protect its citizens from violence. This has been emphasized by the English philosopher of the 17th century, Thomas Hobbes, highlighted that the key role of the state is to, I quote, protect citizens from each other. So understanding that gender-based violence, therefore, that we are speaking about today is not caused by aliens or is caused by machines. It is caused by citizens of this country, and it is caused to others. So since the dawn of democracy, South Africa has tried to fight through the enactment of progressive laws for at least arriving at an acceptable gender equality, because we as South Africa, we have a society that is gender unequal, and we have discrimination that is more based or more facing women, and it leads mostly to discrimination, abuse, and killing of women, such as we see currently through the gender-based violence. Now, when we were doing this, or when government was doing this, government have also anchored this from the Constitution of South Africa and also from the Women's Charter. The Women's Charter that was adopted in 1954, but was also further adopted post-liberation of South Africa in 1994, that spoke for ending the inequality that existed between men and women. But importantly, the Women's Charter and also the Constitution spoke to social justice. From the perspective that I will be speaking on, I will first see gender-based violence as not only a crime, but also as a social injustice. It is for this reason then, over the years, that South Africa has had progressive laws that were ought to protect the citizens, especially the vulnerable, which are women and children in this instance of gender-based violence. There is a variety that protected them against domestic violence, against discrimination in the workplace, generally against also the economic violence that is gender-based, where they were being sidelined in opportunities in the employment through the enactment of the employment equity and the likes. But throughout those years, gender-based violence continued. It continued to the current state and proportions that we are in, where South Africa has been, in terms of the United Nations, been ranked amongst the top countries that are unsafe for women. With all those laws and policies that are in place, South Africa remains unsafe for women. Being unsafe for women, there is another aspect that we must also look, and I'm glad because there is Umiscan, the issue of justice, therefore, meted or being served when women have been victimized in terms of gender-based violence. That then shown that the role, which is the anchor of what I'm speaking about, the role of the state in protecting citizens against each other, from each other, has been compromised. This has led to numerous activists in South Africa in all spheres of life, whether it's civil society, the academia, parliamentarians, and the religious sector coming together to fight and call for the president and government to act beyond the laws that are in place. You would remember that there was the August shutdown, total shutdown in South Africa, where we were highlighting back in 2019, highlighting that there is a problem that needs to be dealt with. And the women of the country were under siege at that particular time. I think we have that confirmed by the president of the Republic, who described in his opening address to the joint sitting that was called specifically to address what was termed the national crisis of violence in our country. I want to quote President Ramaphosa when he addressed the joint sitting. He said, open quote, "The women and children of this country are under siege. There is a very violent and brutal war underway against the women of South Africa," close quotes. This was happening in a country where progressive laws have been put in place, where beyond the progressive laws, where many civil society and all the South Africans have raised their voice. But besides that, the president provided frightening figures of rape statistics and the number of women and children that were being killed each and every year. And he also correctly pointed out violence against women and children reflected an endemic lawlessness and a broader crisis of violence in our society. So it became an undeniable fact that South Africa holds a shameful distinction of being one of the most unsafe places in the world to be a woman. We have amongst the highest rates of intimate partner violence, and the recently released data from Stats SA show that rape and sexual violence have become hyper-endemic. Women and girls are being abused, assaulted, and murdered in our country every day at the hands of men. And what is even more worrying is that KwaZulu-Natal is leading when it comes to shameful gender-based violence, as stated by crime statistics for the first quarter of 2021. The recent statistics also further show that our own Inanda police station, which is in Durban being the center of the economy of KwaZulu-Natal, Inanda police station is having the highest number of rape cases in the whole of the country. And this is not something that I am raising because I'm proud of, but I am raising to highlight the fact that in KwaZulu-Natal and also in South Africa, there has been an increase. There has been laws that have been enacted. There are police stations that are built, and the crime stats continue to show that. But also I am raising the issue of Inanda, because there is another relationship that we must find with gender-based violence. Inanda is an area outside the economic hub of the province of KwaZulu-Natal, but it is in the poor side of Durban when you look at the economic landscape of the metro. But also, you must also remember that the majority of the unskilled labor that flock into the metro would find their residence in areas like Inanda and other townships. Now, after the president have called that sitting in 2019, he then called for a development of a comprehensive national strategic framework, which is aimed at ending gender-based violence and femicide in our country. The plan is centered around the strengthening of the criminal justice system, enhancing the legal and policy framework, care, support, and healing for victims of violence, as well as improving the economic power of women in South Africa. Meaning that government, after realizing that the laws are not necessarily yielding the desired consequences or results, there must be something that must be done, that must target, not in a general manner, like the laws might be, but target what is to be done now that we are facing this pandemic. And he also did not underscore the importance of having laws that protect the citizens. Hence, there was an introduction of 3 new bills to Parliament that are designed to bring justice to the victims of gender-based violence. With the bills, the government hopes to tackle 3 key issues that relate to gender-based violence, which is the process of applying for a protection order, state police not taking harassment claims seriously, and the lack of accountability and adequate punitive measures for offenders. It is a well-known factor that in some areas of our province, which do represent the state, especially I would make mention of Umlazi, many offenders have gone off with slight punishment, where the magistrates would be giving very unreasonable low sentences. But government did not keep quiet. The JSC, together with the Parliament and the Department of Justice, had worked together, but of course, as a result of pressure from civil society, to ensure that magistrates and judges are made to be accountable for the sentences that they are issuing. So government was continuing to provide the protection of the laws that they have put in place. But this also proved that not only government through laws and policies will be able to eradicate gender-based violence. It also proved the necessity for all of those who are peace-loving and pro-justice South Africans to rise up and join government in the fight against gender-based violence. Working together with government and the KwaZulu-Natal legislature, we have taken steps to address some worrying rates of gender-based violence, which have reached crisis proportions even in the province of KwaZulu-Natal. We have worked closely with both the Office of the Premier and the Office of the MEC of Social Development and the entire Department of Social Development and the Department of Community Safety to provide safety for women, but also to provide support for women who have been victims of gender-based violence. We have, as the legislature of KwaZulu-Natal, further noted that there are many factors that are contributing to the state of gender-based violence, whilst not getting into detail. But I will also mention that we've noted that culture is one of the factors that is used for gender-based violence. Some people misuse culture and perpetuate gender-based violence in the name of preserving culture. One of such instances is the custom of Ukuthwala. The provincial government, together with the legislature, have had campaigns to end Ukuthwala, which, as the legislature, through the leadership of the Committee of Quality of Life, we have seen it now as nothing but the violent abduction of young innocent girls by men with the intention of compelling their families to endorse marriage negotiations. In fact, we even go further through the Quality of Life and the Women's Caucus, say that Ukuthwala that is being practiced is equal to actual institutionalized rape of young girls. In fact, the reason we say that it is being institutionalized is because they use culture as an excuse, whilst in essence, they are condoning old men raping young girls, and families are part of selling off. Sometimes families think that they are preserving their culture, but in essence, they are committing crimes. And if they are not being held accountable by society and then by government, this will continue. This is done by the Standing Committee on Quality of Life, but we are doing it in partnership with these other departments. But also, the KwaZulu-Natal legislature, when there was the breakout of the killing of women in the Umthwalume areas around the South Coast, they then went out to do public consultations and also do public education in those areas. This was done by 3 portfolio committees, which is quality of life again, the portfolio committee on social development, and the portfolio committee on community safety. Together, working with the Women's Caucus, we also called upon all women formations of the parties that are represented in the KwaZulu-Natal legislature to form an alliance with us so that we understand that gender-based violence go beyond political lines. Gender-based violence affect us as a people first before it comes to politics. So to address this further, the legislature has in the recent past been working closely with NGOs and institutions of higher learning, the Gender Commission, and traditional leaders to develop a concrete plan to look at how we must end the ukuthwala practice, which we maintain is institutionalized rape and selling of young women. But we also find that within the KwaZulu-Natal context and the country, there is also the worrying factor of targeting the LGBTIQ communities in the gender-based violence, in what is still the misuse of culture, where people do not accept the sexuality of one, but think that they can do corrective rape that even leads to murder. We are facing this scourge and others in the province, and it has made the KwaZulu-Natal legislature to see the reality that at the source of everything that is bad for a society lies discrimination. And if we continue to live in a discriminative way and we are not doing anything, we will not progress. To address then these challenges, the KwaZulu-Natal legislature recently held the first ever symposium of the LGBTIQ, which was attended by participants from all walks of life, including amakhosi, academics, and government entities. We are proud that the session was able to put on the spotlight, a spotlight on the challenges and develop a concrete roadmap which we believe will see various stakeholders working towards the elimination of this discrimination. It was not going to be enough for us to just come and speak and leave, but we had to put this roadmap that we are going to ensure that we come back to it annually. Again, in 2022, when we meet, we want to assess the road covered, but also mobilize people across the sector to be allies of the LGBTIQ community so that we end discrimination. When we end discrimination, gender-based violence, because at the center of gender-based violence, there is discrimination, whether you're discriminating on the basis of gender or discriminating on the basis of sexuality, but you first have to discriminate to use your violence. We have done this work as a legislature, but we know that this work is to complement the work that is done by government. And we are also mindful that whatever achievements may have been made since 1994, they are being undermined by the continued rise in numbers of gender-based violence and femicide. Gender-based violence and femicide impact profoundly on the lives and well-being of survivors, families, communities, and the broader society. GBV and femicide also compromise the realization of the ideals of South Africa, especially to have a non-sexist and a prosperous South Africa. So regardless of the many arguments and counter arguments that might come, GBV is an enemy of progress of South Africa as a nation. But we have also noted as the legislature that there is a most common used argument to justify GBV, which sometimes is poverty. I don't believe that we should blame poverty alone. There is ample evidence that there are many countries, especially in our continent and the world, that are poorer than us. But where we do not see the high numbers of gender-based violence like we are currently seeing in South Africa. We are well aware that there is a high prevalence of gender-based violence and rape in countries that are very affluent, countries that are so-called the first world countries. You find that there is high prevalence of GBV, yet we want to use poverty as an excuse for gender-based violence. Why then in those countries that do not have problems of poverty? We also have to remember that there was a research that was conducted by Amnesty International that showed that the reason why some countries that are called first world countries have challenges of gender-based violence was, I want to quote the report of the Amnesty International. Part of the rape myth is to hold women responsible for being subjected to violence and abuse. Victim blaming seems to be particularly tenacious. Other stereotypes includes ideas about what rape is like. Skewed news reporting may also contribute to the impression that, for example, rape by a complete stranger is common, or that rape is mostly perpetrated by certain types of men, close quotes. So if we continue to live with such myths, it means that the work of government and that of the criminal justice system will not be able to fulfill the fight that we have against gender-based violence. But also we must remember that if such myths exist in countries that are affluent, in a country like ours, which is not at that particular level, though we may be poorer than them, it is also very easy to use such myths and excuses to continue to perpetuate GBV. And if we allow that, we will be weakening our criminal justice system. We know that culture is not a supporter of these matters that are raised that relate to dominating women in a violent manner. In the Zulu culture, Nomkhubulwane, the goddess of rain, nature and fertility, was also a female. Nomkhubulwane was worshipped over 200 years ago, and we are told that with the introduction of Christianity, the worship of the female aspects of God waned, while the worship of the male aspect, uNkulunkulu, remained. This tells us that we must look closely at issues that relate to culture and religion to also see whether the sector cannot also assist in abating gender-based violence and putting forward the programs of government that have been put forward to deal with gender-based violence. We understand that also, ladies and gentlemen, when we are fighting gender-based violence, we also sometimes think that gender-based violence is perpetuated by one sex or one gender. We must also say that in some instances, it is perpetuated also from both sides. And we must ensure that men and women are given equal opportunities, therefore, to end and prevent this. It is a fact that South Africa's progressive laws have resulted in more women serving in high-ranking positions than ever before. Access to education for young girls has improved. However, the female unemployment rate has remained higher, and this should be addressed by our own government and also by us as women that are activists in the sector. We are raising this because we want to say that whilst government has put in place means, whether it is at home, in the workplace, in school, in church, and everywhere, there remains a possibility that gender-based violence may be perpetuated. We must then strive together with government to ensure that we end gender-based violence by being the ambassadors against gender-based violence in all our spaces. Civil society has a major role to play. by building strong advocacy and awareness about the GBV sketch. But also government has another responsibility to ensure that advocacy work is part of the programs that are being given and is supporting the existence of the NGOs and CBOs that are working in the sector. We know that there could be no fight without progressive partnerships. That is why we must be calling for media, faith-based, and other leaders to also come in partnership with government to challenge gender stereotypes and toxic masculinity, and engaging with law enforcement to ensure safety for women and girls. Above all, my view is that whilst government has made some strides and parliaments have enacted laws, government or the state alone cannot eradicate gender-based violence, but needs unity and collaboration of all of us as citizens. We must use this collaboration to ensure enforcement and compliance with set laws, but also being advocates of peace, non-discrimination, and promotion of a violent-free South Africa. When we do this and having these collaborations and having opportunities like this one, we will be having a progressive move from the current statistics. Program Director of Proceedings, thank you for the opportunity to make a presentation on my views on gender-based violence.
Thank you, Honorable Boyce. We really appreciate you and listening to your submissions, so touching, so challenging, and it is calling on us not to give up, at least seeing people of your status and caliber taking the lead. And also the content has really, really given us a strong food for thought. And you haven't opened the floor in such a strong, powerful way. I think we will be living today like knowing exactly where we belong and what we have to do. So on behalf of the university, including the law school, and of course my bosses on the platform and all our audiences, thank you so, so much. I think one of the things that I was able to pick up is also what the state is doing, especially the KZN legislature. So I know that questions will start coming in. If I may just quickly address the audience, please use the Q&A box to send your questions through to us. Don't put them on the chat. Use the Q&A questions box. So thank you so, so much, Honorable Boyce. We will move forward. We're a little bit already behind and we don't want to finish late like we did yesterday. Can I please call on Ms. Asiya Khan of the DOJ to address us as briefly as possible? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Director of Proceedings. Thank you for having me on this platform. I'd like to say very warm welcome and good morning to Honorable Boyce. It was very nice, very informative session. And to all the students that have joined us. My task today is to tell you a little about the legislation. As our program director said, I'm from the Department of Justice. I'm the Director Legal in KZN. I'm going to take you through the Domestic Violence Act and how the procedure works and how do you go about applying for a protection order in terms of the Domestic Violence Act. I'm going to share my screen now so that you can go through my presentation and we'll take questions thereafter. Okay, so the Domestic Violence Act 116 of 1998, it was implemented on the 15th of December, 1999. Okay, next. Okay, I want to put on the preamble. As we know, the preamble is the heart of the act, just like our constitution. And I want to read it to you very quickly so you understand what the Domestic Violence Act preamble says. Recognizing that domestic violence is a serious social ill that there's a high incidence of domestic violence within South African society, that victims of domestic violence are amongst the most vulnerable members of society, that domestic violence takes on many forms, that acts of domestic violence may be committed in a wide range of domestic relationships, and that the remedies currently available to the victims of domestic violence have proved to be ineffective. That's a part of the preamble, and that was the reason why the Domestic Violence Act came into operation. So what is domestic violence? Probably many people have experienced this but don't realize that it's domestic violence. Domestic violence is a controlling or abusive behavior that occurs in a social relationship and which harms or may cause imminent harm to the safety, health, or well-being of the complainant. Now, I've put up here a little cycle that I'd like us to all take note of. This is the cycle of violence, sometimes something that we'd like to deny, and very often that we don't acknowledge. So we start off with the calm, and thereafter you see the tension building, the name calling, the insults, and then it leads to that dynamic incident explosion. And what happens thereafter? That incident explosion could result in an assault, in a slap, in a punch. And then we have the remorse, the making up, where I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do this. Please accept my apology, I love you a lot. And so what does the victim say? Accepts it, and we go ahead. We continue in our relationship, and it's a vicious cycle of violence because you have the calm and then the tension building starts all over again. Now, I want to just tell you what types of relationships are covered by the Domestic Violence Act very, very quickly, because the Domestic Violence Act is very specific to familial relationships where there's a family kind of relationship between the parties. So it's either where people are or were married, and it takes into account that there could be customary marriages or religious marriages that are not recognized in law but do exist. People live or lived together, whether same or opposite sex. Parents of a child or those who have parental responsibilities, so they might not be living together, but they have a child between them. Family members that are related by blood, affinity, or adoption. So it could be your sister-in-law, your father-in-law, your brother-in-law. People who are or were, that's important, engaged, dating, or in a customary relationship, or people who share or recently shared a residence. Now, there are 7 kinds of behaviors that the Domestic Violence Act has identified, and I hope my presentation will be shared, Madam Chair. I'm not going to go into very much detail because it's quite in-depth, but I just want to give you an idea. The most obvious one will be the physical abuse, where there's actually a physical threat or where there's an actual action. Then it's the sexual abuse, where your sexual integrity is violated, and generally where there's a lack of consent, that can be considered to be sexual abuse. Then we have the emotional, verbal, and psychological abuse. And for me, this is the most difficult part. This is the most difficult one because you can't see the scar, you can't see the blue eye, you can't see the bust lip, but it's what the person is going through emotionally or psychologically that is more damaging. And these are kinds of examples of this abuse. Then there's the economic abuse, where your money is taken away, where he unreasonably gets rid of the house furniture, where he's supposed to provide for you, but he doesn't do so, and he is the breadwinner. And then we have intimidation, harassment, stalking, and these are examples of that. We have damage to property, where he deliberately damages your property. He enters your residence without your consent if you're not sharing a residence. And then the most important part is any other controlling or abusive behavior towards a complainant. And this is the part that gives the judicial officer the discretion as to whether they should grant the protection order or not. Now, I've got only 5 or 10 minutes. I'm going to tell you very quickly how to go about it. Actually, every magistrate's court has a family court section where you can go and apply for a protection order, okay? And I want to, at this stage, say to you that laying a criminal complaint is a parallel process to applying for a protection order. So no one should tell you, don't apply for a protection order because you've laid a criminal charge for assault, or no one should tell you you can't lay a criminal charge for assault because you've applied for a protection order. These are completely parallel processes. A minor can apply for the protection order without the assistance of a parent or guardian because it could very well be that it's a family member who's abusing the minor child. And if they go and ask them to assist them, they could face resistance. So the courts actually allow that a minor child can come before them without the assistance. Obviously, this is done in a court on application together with affidavits that are considered by the magistrate. And basically, it's the court that will have jurisdiction is where the complainant resides, carries on business or lives, or where the respondent resides, carries on business or lives, or where the incident happened. So for example, if you are on holiday and you've got your spouse or your boyfriend attacked you, you're from Durban, you're in Cape Town, it doesn't mean you need to come all the way back to Durban to go and seek a protection order. You can go and do it in Cape Town. An interim protection order is generally granted as at a first instance where the magistrate might think that there's imminent harm. And thereafter, the respondent is given the opportunity to oppose that application as to whether it should be granted as a final order or not. At the time that the interim protection order is granted, once you receive a certified copy of the protection order, and only when the application and the order has been served on the respondent, do you come back and get the issued warrant of arrest. And the purpose of the warrant of arrest is if there is a breach of the order, then you can go to your nearest police station, file an affidavit, and the perpetrator can be arrested. This is what happens on the return date. If there is no opposition, or if the opposition to your application is not substantive enough and the magistrate feels that you are in danger, then you can get a final protection order, or these are the other outcomes on the final date. What I want to say to you is that once the final order is granted, the warrant of arrest must be authorized as soon as it's granted. And I want to say to you a very important thing is that this protection order that you have has no lifespan. So it's not like in 5 years or 10 years, it's going to expire, it comes to an end and you reapply. It's only upon the death of the applicant or the respondent that that protection order is of no value or no force of effect. And I want to tell you very quickly while I have the platform of the Protection from Harassment Act 17 of 2011. This is a very similar process, and it came into operation on the 27th of April 2013. But the difference between this act and the Domestic Violence Act is that there's no domestic relationship that is required. So it could be where you are seeking a protection order against your neighbor, your friend, or your colleague at work, or it could be someone that you don't know their identity, but they are harassing you and stalking you either through social media or on an electronic platform. And so you are entitled to come to court to make an application. And if you don't know, for example, who the cell number belongs to, but they are harassing you, then you can come to court and the court can make an order for the electronic communication service provider to identify who the respondent is and to furnish that information to the court. And a similar order can be made against the SAPS for them to investigate the name and address of the respondent and to provide that to the court. So this is where there is no relationship as in terms of the Domestic Violence Act. The important thing about this one is that these orders only remain in force for 5 years or until such further period as the court may determine on good cause. And like the Domestic Violence Act that allows for emergency monetary relief, for example, if you're kicked out of the house and you are now left stranded, you don't have money, the Domestic Violence Court can make an order that he pay you emergency monetary relief for a certain period. This act does not allow for that. So those are the procedures very quickly, the process that you will follow, and every magistrate's court has a court that will take a domestic violence application. Thank you very much. And I hope I stuck to my time, Director of Proceedings.
You did so well. Thank you so much. You know, yesterday we went way above time, and today we're trying to remedy that. Thank you so much. Asia's presentation will be circulated for those who have registered, and we have your details. We know that some are just using the link directly with that RSVP, so we don't have your email address, so you might have to request. And the presentation is very detailed, but unfortunately, we cannot cover all the slides one by one. And just like Professor Manige already said, this is quite a broad area, and squeezing it into this amount of time, it's kind of, you know, we can do justice to this topic, which means that, you know, in academia, we'll say there's room for research. So which means we are looking forward to more projects like this. So please feel free to enlighten us. So thank you so much, Mr. Sia Khan. We thank you and we appreciate your department for the support. So another impressive presentation. And now we will call on Mr. Batandua Mki, the PCRC for CLM as representative for UKZN. And yesterday we did introduce Mr. Mki. So for those of you who might not know him, this is actually the convener of the project. This is actually his idea. And it's so sad because since yesterday we've been saying men. And now here is a unique man who is saying enough is enough. Mr. Mki, I hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Advocate Balogun. I would like to greet the DVC and the head of the college, Professor MacArthur. I'd like to greet the Dean of the School of Law, Professor Redi Managai, the Dean of the School of Accounting, Economics and Finance, in his absentia, the Dean of the School of Management, IT and Governance, in his absentia, and please allow me to observe all protocol present today. So my talk for today will be closely linked to the one from yesterday, and yesterday I spoke about, or rather I spoke in my capacity as the conceiver of this initiative. And today I am speaking about the role that we as men can play. And it is out of the realization of the significant role that we as men can play in the betterment of our society that I conceived this idea. However, that role that we as men can play is actually, or rather has to be at an amplified level. And it has to be at an amplified level because we are very central to the most pervasive and persistent social ill of our time, which happens to be gender-based violence. And yesterday, I quoted the quote, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times," from The Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. The quote could have been describing the state of calamity that society has plunged into in recent time. And this calamity necessitates an interrogatory conversation that seeks to investigate the anchors that have sustained it for so long. For a correct and informed perspective on this matter, the conversation needs to happen at the inclusion of men. We can never have a meaningful conversation or rather discussion about gender-based violence at the exclusion of men. And in working towards rebuilding and restoring the moral fabric of our society that has become a breeding ground for gender-based violence, we need an honest conversation between men and women. The time has never been more allowing to begin sanitizing the private conversations we have regarding women. The culture of reducing them to mere objects whose existence is for the sole purpose of servicing the needs of the man. A common informal culture of this objectification can be noticed from young boys and even older men and the comments that they often make when a woman is passing by. And I believe that this is referred to as catcalling. And it has gotten to a point whereby women avoid certain spaces because these remarks can at times be followed by inappropriate touching that happens without the consent of the woman or girl, with the latter's consent being a non-factor to the perpetrator. And these are incidents that happen everywhere. And the question would always be, as a man in the circle of your fellow men, what did you do to protect the woman from such harassment? Did you keep quiet because you want to be seen or referred to as a cool gent? When your friends are catcalling a woman, do you keep quiet? This is where the real change begins, transforming the narrative in your inner circle. And when your fellow man makes sexual innuendos about women, do you keep quiet? That is where a progressive man who takes responsibility and accountability through reforming the conversation which has long been had about women is identifiable. A man who keeps quiet is an accomplice to an act that has emboldened this unconscionable violation of human rights. This era needs a new age breed of man who will say a word and subsequently supplement that word with an action aimed at disarming gender-based violence. A new age breed of man who will never deflect and resort to being defensive by saying, not all of us men do that. And I find this to be a very problematic disposition because we live in a world where girls are sexually abused by their fathers, where girls and women are sexually abused and subsequently murdered by their intimate partners, where young girls are molested by their uncles for years, where wives endure years of abuse at the hands of the man who had vowed to protect and honor her for as long as he lives, where religious leaders, the likes of Omotoso, taking advantage of women and girls who seek for refuge from them as their spiritual guiders. So, women are justified when they express their distrust of men in general, and a progressive man would be enraged not at the expression of the distrust, but the atrocities inflicted by fellow men to women and girls. As men, we must take it upon ourselves to be at the forefront of our own rehabilitation. We must initiate grassroots organizations in collaboration with organizations such as Sonke Gender Justice. These grassroots organizations would be aimed at rehabilitating young boys from the manifestations of toxic masculinity that they've had to live with, or rather that they've been exposed to at an early age. And this requires a comprehensive strategy that takes into account the role that activities that happen in the confines of the home have on the outer society. And in remedying this and eradicating the gender-based violence, rather the scourge of gender-based violence, we need to see ourselves as agents of change and subsequently act in accordance with that. The need to build a socially cohesive society with strong familial bonds must not become too overbearing that the provision of justice is at risk. Police officials must make this their task. And in small community service centers, we see the prevalence of police officials suggesting restorative measures without them actively facilitating those restorative measures. Despite that this may be with good intention, but it does more harm than good, And this is evident from the case that Advocate Naidu yesterday made reference to, that a lady was murdered by her boyfriend years after dropping the case. And in my speech yesterday, and I would encourage everyone to go to YouTube and watch it because it has already been uploaded, I spoke about the change that we can bring forth as men. And I said that as men, the change we can bring forth is not really through speaking and platforms like this. In our efforts to find solutions, we must diagnose, or rather we must actually not misdiagnose the problem. I have over time observed the contributions that we as men make in women empowerment seminars, and would actually happen to be burdening women to change themselves so as to avoid incidents of gender-based violence. We tell women that they must avoid certain public spaces, or that they must not walk alone at night, or that they must desist from wearing certain clothes, or that they must be cautious of how they converse with men, lest that gives the wrong impression. So it is always about what women must do. And I can't help it, but feel frustrated by this, because women who have absolutely nothing to change about themselves are now finding themselves in a position whereby we as men actually, or rather constantly say to them, you must change this about yourself, you must change the way you're dressing, you must not work here, and all of that. But we never address the real problem, which is us as men. It is us men who must reform ourselves. This conversation that seeks to suggest that women are the cause of their own abuse should be condemned with the strongest contempt. And it is indicative of how millions of men out there cannot exercise self-restraint and control. And in closing, because I do not want to take too much time, I want to emphasize that there's no Messiah, one great person, or one body which is going to radically change the national position regarding gender-based violence. It is a process which is gradual. It requires that we be informed first so we can adequately educate children, creating a chain of reformed beings and a reformed nation. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes my segment, or rather my contribution for day 2 of the symposium. Thank you so much.
Wow. Viva. Viva Nki. Mr. Nki, we appreciate you. We look forward to seeing more of you. I mean, this is a gentleman that is going places. Hey, I am so proud of being part of UKZN. Can you just imagine having this young man being part of us? What a privilege. What a blessing. We need more. We need more of you. Please don't stop. Go out there and make the change. Be that change, okay? This is beautiful. Thank you so, so much. If we can just transform, reform, as he was saying, we need to go back to how we think. Why must women be blamed for everything? You walk in a certain way, then you're accused of walking like a man. You dress in a certain way, then that is not good enough. But we never stop to say, what is your business with that? And just like Honorable Boy said, at the end of it, at the bottom, there is some kind of discrimination. There is something that appears to others as unacceptable. If you're submissive, then you're too submissive, then you get battered. If you talk back, then you're rude, you're not raised well, then you get battered. If you get a job, it is an offense if you're asking to be beaten up. If you stay at home, then you're useless, you have no economic value. What is wrong with us? How are we raising our boys? How are we raising our young boys before they become men? What are the elderly men saying? The older men, what are they saying? What are you doing about this? what needs to change. Thank you so much. Such a very young, inspirational, dynamic young man who is thinking differently. Thank you, Mr. Mki. So we are about to finish off our program, and now we're going to open up the floor to our respondents, and some of them did not participate yesterday. So I will just briefly just introduce our panel for today. So today we have Eleanor Lengi, who is actually the acting coordinator for the UKZN HIV and AIDS program. She is a social worker. We've been seeing some questions about where are the psychologists on the platform, where are the social workers? So now you, for those raising those questions, you can have them answered very soon. We also have Busiswe Ramabodo, who happens to be the Director of the Human Resources and Development. And the beautiful thing about this wonderful, wonderful person is that she is also a psychologist, which is excellent. She actually has a master's degree in psychology. So can you just imagine that? So this is brilliant because if you look at the title of our program, it also talks about harassment. So women also get harassed at work, students also get harassed on campus. So let's open the floor to our respondents. And I think also we have Ms. Palesa Malau, and also we have Ms. Jui Ansraj. These are some of our students, but they're doing excellent work in their areas. So thank you so much. The floor now is open to our respondents. If we can keep the conversation short, but of course, making it meaningful, and then we can quickly take the questions and answers in like 5 minutes, and we can finish off at exactly 12:30. Thank you so much.
Hi, Vicky, and all protocols observed. I'm going to be very, very quick in responding. And what's very interesting and exciting is that we have somebody who's a male who is advocating on our behalf. I think very quickly, with whatever is being said, what came to my mind is the whole issue of the protection orders, which really I am excited that people must make use of it and be more serious about it. But leaving you with the ABC, because people are saying, we know all this, what then? We in the HIV and AIDS program have the ABC of abstain, be faithful, and condomize. I want to bring into you a new ABC, as in people's attitudes and their behavior is what leads to the consequences. And so if we want to change that, I think we may need to be looking at that. And I want to just leave it there to say we need 24/7, 365 PAPS incident reporting and getting those protection orders as quickly as they can. But thanks to a very, very good program for today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Helena. That's straight and direct. Thank you so much. Can we have any of the other respondents? We have, I think we have Palesa also, and I think one of the points that Honorable Boyce made also was the issue of discrimination, gender exclusion, and of course, the impact of GBV also on LGBTQ and of course, women generally. What about, I believe we have a lot of students and on this platform. How do you feel? We of course, because we've got the community, the UKZN community that can also respond to some of the things. How do you feel about that? So can we have more responses? What about children, the impact on the children, etc. Yeah.
Hey, thank you, Advocate Balogun. So if I may also just come in there as a respondent, I've been asked to respond on gender-based violence and harassment in the workplace. But let me first greet all the colleagues and the dignitaries that are joined here today, and also commend you on organizing this series of seminars to discuss such an important issue of gender-based violence. And I'm very excited to have listened. I did join briefly yesterday to have listened to this conversation and some of your guests as well this morning in terms of what is being done by the KZN legislature, as well as the Department of Justice, as well as the work that is being done by Mr. Bathandwa Mkhi. Bathandwa Mkhi, I think you are the change that we are looking for, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done in our society in terms of dealing with gender-based violence. And as women, we've had the conversation from the inception of feminism. Women have been defending their rights. And with all of that work being done, it seems like we are still not making progress in terms of preventing the atrocity of violence being inflicted on women. So we really need men to join in the conversation, to share their views, to say, you know, not in my name, as some of the men have been saying. I have 2 children. I have a boy and a girl, and I shudder at the thought of the world that they are growing into, at the thought of the fact that, in one way or another, my daughter is at risk of being exposed to what happened to Nosicelo at the University of Fort Hare. And I shudder at the thought of the fact that my son, the very same son that I'm raising, could be on the other side of what happened to Nosicelo. And really, there is so much work as a society that we need to do. And it's not the work of women, it is also the work of men, because it needs to start from when the children are young. As a psychologist, I sometimes see it as a crisis of emotional intelligence. As a society, we have failed to teach our young boys how to manage their emotions. We teach them to bottle them up. And as a result, what happens is that they don't learn, how do I manage anger? How do I manage fear? How do I manage anxiety? All of those emotions are useful in life. However, when they, as a result of unreal threats, or the behavior leads to an infringement to the rights of other people, then that's when you have a serious problem. You know, Mr. Mkhi speaks about the man's ability to exercise restraint, you know, to exercise emotional control. All of those things go back to emotional intelligence. So we need to shift from this thing of saying boys don't have feelings, boys don't cry, and so on, because as a society, we need to teach our children how to manage their emotions, so that when they grow up, they know, you know, how to deal with the disappointment. When my girlfriend dumps me, or when my girlfriend has another boyfriend, how do I deal with that disappointment? It's something that they need to learn at a young age. And the fact that sometimes life is not going to go the way that you want to go. And you need to be able to manage the disappointment that goes with life not going your way sometimes, which is normal. So I'm here also to talk about what the university is doing, because as a university, we are a microcosm of society. And as a result, the common man that you find in Eshowe and so on is the same man that you would find in the midst of our community within the university. Over the years, we have found that although in the country and internationally, they say that 1/3 of females have experienced sexual harassment in the workplace, we have found that at UKZN, we have a low prevalence in terms of our employees being exposed to sexual harassment and gender-based violence. However, we know that that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, because we know that sometimes we need to create an environment that makes it conducive for reporting. And there's a lot of things that we've done, which I'm going to share shortly, to try and create that environment that is conducive for reporting. So over the years, of course, the university is influenced by the legislations that the colleagues have spoken about from yesterday and today, including the Employment Equity Act with regards to elimination of discrimination in the workplace, as well as the legislation and the frameworks that have come more recently from the Department of Higher Education, where they have been looking at some of the things that the sector itself can do in order to enable the universities to respond to the scourge of gender-based violence. For example, the Department of Higher Education has recently released a policy framework to address the GBV in the PSET sector. And that has been approved in June, July of 2021. And all the universities have been mandated to look at how their strategies and response to GBV speaks to this framework, which has been crafted also in relation to the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide of 2020. So as a result, the university's approach as well, when it comes to issue of GBV and harassment at the workplace, and includes broadly also what happens to students, because we have found that as a member also of the Gender-Based Violence Committee, that most of the cases that we receive on gender-based violence and harassment are cases that are between students or otherwise also between staff and students, because of those power dynamics that exist between the staff and students. So to that effect, there's a policy framework that has been developed by the university. We have the gender-based violence policy and the procedure, which outlines, how we see gender-based violence, how we have adopted a stance of zero tolerance for gender-based violence in the university. We've got a sexual harassment policy and procedure, and we established the Gender-Based Violence Committee, which consists of stakeholders from HR, stakeholders from student side, and also students in terms of the SRC are also represented in that committee. So that this committee provides oversight and check cases and outcomes. And through this committee, we were able to also get the university to come up with the panic button on the UKZN app, where students could be able, and students and staff could be able to access in case they find themselves in a tricky situation where they are needing to call support. And we have been advised that RMS receives those calls from that panic button, and they are able to respond timelessly, as the app is able to tell where the student or the staff is when they press the panic button. And I'm also excited to say that the university currently is in the process of developing a compulsory module, which is going to be compulsory for all first-year students and foundation students on critical social justice and citizenship, which is meant to explore the complexity of gender-based violence as far as issues of identity, issues of power, and issues of privilege are concerned. Yes, when we get students on our campuses, when we get employees on our campuses, they already are developed individuals who already have been shaped by their society and the culture where they come from. But we believe that through this course, we're going to provide a space for critically engaging on some of the issues that Mr. Mkhize also touched on, issues of gender identity and how we need to transform as a society in terms of how we hold certain perceptions and certain stereotypes. We also continue with training. We train in our first line employees, our RMS staff, our staff in the residencies have been trained on how to respond to gender-based violence when they receive the cases, as well as expose all our new employees that join the university. Remember, I said some of the cases we have received of gender-based violence have been from staff to students. So it becomes important that when our new employees join the university, they are very well aware of what the university will tolerate and what it will not tolerate. Because yes, we have culture out there, but as a university, we can have our own culture and we can determine what we will and what we will not tolerate. So through exposing our employees through the GPV training. When they join, we are able to tell them what the university stands for and what would be the consequence of engaging in such behavior. And of course, when we receive cases, we are able to pursue them to finality if they are not withdrawn. We do find that some cases do get withdrawn, and that's sometimes one of the things that renders the policies and the procedures ineffective. When you either have cases not being reported, or secondly, you have cases being reported but being withdrawn. And then, of course, we had that whole issue about Durban survivors. And again, the university responded decisively when it came to the perpetrators that were named in that hashtag that happened, I think it was about 2019. Again, indicating the stance of the university as far as zero tolerance of gender-based violence and harassment is concerned. We provide support through ICAS for employee well-being for employees that experience gender-based violence, either at UKZN. We see this also as a platform where employees can be able to report if they are not able to report internally. And also students receive support through student services where they have been exposed to cases of gender-based violence. And then lastly, over the past year from 2020 to 2021, the university has embarked on reviewing its gender-based violence strategy and response. We've made a huge financial investment as a university, where we've employed the services of an external organization called NICTEM. And this organization is assisting us in terms of looking at our current framework when it comes to gender-based violence and sexual harassment and identifying the gaps. We've concluded the process of identifying the gaps through a situational analysis. And we've, through that process, developed a draft GPV strategy and a draft plan of action. Of course, these documents have to be aligned with the National Strategic Plan, as I've indicated earlier on. They also have to be aligned with the DHEAD policy framework to address GPV in the PSET system. So what we are currently doing with this process is that we are currently consulting with students through focus groups and staff in order to get their inputs on these draft documents, as well as any other issues that the university may need to embark on in order to deal with the issue of gender-based violence and sexual harassment in the university. And then lastly, Chair, I just wanted to touch on how men can contribute. So that will be my last response, because I think this is quite important, because most of us are saying that we need to see more men getting involved in this conversation. And I came across a website which outlines so nicely how men can get involved. So the first thing that men need to do is to create safe spaces for children. The previous speaker spoke about domestic violence at home. That is where adults are made. So men need to create a safe space for children from the home to the school system and beyond to stop the cycle of violence. So men need to be active fathers to ensure that they are there for their children in order to help them to teach the emotional skills that I spoke about earlier on as well. They need to get involved in childcare and form closer connections with younger children from the beginning. There is no best way for a young boy to learn how to be a man from an adult male that can serve as a role model and an educator and a mentor. They need to raise boys to break free from harmful stereotypes. So as Mr. Mki was saying earlier on, changing and influencing in your inner circle. You know, so those stereotypes are perpetuated in the conversations that men have amongst themselves. And of course, in terms of men that are in the social media, men that are in powerful positions, we need to ensure that they need to ensure that they commit to inclusive storytelling and avoid common harmful gender stereotypes in what is communicated. seek opportunities to really listen to women's stories, acknowledge their experiences, and then inform other men. Support comprehensive sexual education that challenges harmful gender norms in relations. And of course, for those men who are in key positions, donate to, fund, and support specialist women organizations and anti-violence services such as domestic violence, helplines, refugee shelters, and rape crisis centers. Participate in campaigns. Most of the time when we have campaigns against gender-based violence and sexual harassment, 99% of the participants are female. So we need to see more men in those awareness campaigns. Remove barriers to women's economic advancement and to positions of leadership. And of course, we know that men are the ones who currently take about 2/3 of leadership positions. So the removal of barriers can only happen when they take initiative. So lastly, they need to challenge harmful masculine norms that encourage violence amongst men and open up and talk with their friends, their peers, their co-workers, and call out sexist ideas, jokes, and language, and reflect on the ways that they have been raised and how to continue to better themselves as allies to achieve gender equality and eliminate the scourge of gender-based violence. So Chair, I can stop there because I can talk a lot, given the time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think, I mean, you have managed to even respond to some of the concerns that was raised. Thank you so much. Can we have Yui respond, and if we could just have a short contribution also from Palesa, and then we can call it a day. Thank you so much, Yui.
Thank you so much, Balogun, and sorry, I think there was an audio issue. I'm so sorry about that. So as I was saying, in November last year, President Ramaphosa had announced that there would be amendments made to several acts. One of them was mentioned by Ms. Khan, and that is the Domestic Violence Act. And yes, amending these acts are great. However, they only work once a crime has been committed. We need to find ways to stop before a crime has been committed. And one of the best ways to do that is through education and educating our youth. We as the youth ourselves who know so much about what's going on with gender-based violence need to be getting onto a grassroots level to go into townships, to go into rural areas, and to have conversations with young boys and men and young girls as well about gender-based violence, about breaking the stigma that a lot of young boys face with, you know, this constant cycle of them being abused, and then they become abusers because they can't speak out or they don't have the resources to assist them. And so one of the great ways that this is being done is through Unicef South Africa. So Unicef South Africa has volunteers across the country at various universities, including our own here at UKZN, in Howard College, Westville, and here in Pietermaritzburg. And these volunteers are on the ground and they can be used to make a difference. We are powerful, we have the tools, we have the knowledge. All we have to do is get out there to these schools to help children. I think, we need to break language barriers as well. We need to really assist kids in the best way possible so that, they can reach out to psychologists. We need to be giving them, numbers for who they can call and who can assist them with these issues that they might be fighting within their homes and within their families. Another great way that South Africans as a whole can assist is through the Uyunae Foundation. They're doing an initiative called From the Post Office to Parliament, and that's where they want South Africans who know what gender-based violence feels like in their homes and in their communities to speak out against it, to write to Parliament and tell them how it's been impacting their homes, how it's been impacting their families, and how Parliament can truly make a change to help all women and all children across our country. So we need to be there for our children, and the youth have great ideas on how we can help change the trajectory of gender-based violence. And we are not resting, and we will not stop advocating for the safety of women and children until we are heard and until we are taken seriously. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Joy, and I really appreciate that presentation. So now we are now reaching a stage where the youth are beginning to say enough is enough. Even in our homes and outside our homes, we will not tolerate any form of GBV, including domestic violence, regardless of the nature or who is perpetrating this crime against us. And I think this is what we want. Having more people having their voices and saying enough is enough. Palisa, can we hear from you if there is anything you would like to contribute?
I would just like to briefly say thank you to the speakers for their contributions.
Palisa, we cannot hear you. Are you muted? Although if you've got your earphones on, you might want to take them out if they're not specifically for Zoom. Thank you, ma'am.
Can you still not hear me?
What's happening? Our mic is not working.
Is it working now?
Yes, Palisa.
Thank you. So I'd just like to briefly say thank you to all the speakers. I think it's very important that we were not just talking about response measures to gender-based violence, but we were sort of talking about preventative measures as well. Because oftentimes in our society, I find that it's the NGOs and the individuals who are actually the victims to this violence who have to sort of take on the responsibility of reducing sort of opportunities for the violence to happen, which we know is actually not really possible because it happens in all spheres of society, public and private. So it's good that we talk about how are we as individuals responsible for checking the people in our lives. So making sure that we don't allow certain behaviors to pass, because oftentimes we frown upon the sort of like the kinds of violence that we consider to be sort of really wild. So like if somebody is raped or somebody is murdered in a particularly brutal way, then that's the only time that we actually take notice, and that's the only time we actually speak out against these things. But then oftentimes there are certain behaviors that actually lead up to these behaviors, such as people sending or men sending women inappropriate sexual messages, sending them inappropriate pictures, and there are jokes that are shared amongst circles of friends that have very misogynistic overtones. So it's the responsibility of each and every person in society to think about how they address these situations when they arise. But then also it's important to recognize that the government also has to take most of the responsibility. And it's a great victory that we now have the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide, because it's not just like legislation, because South Africa has great legislation. We're signatories to great treaties, but now the plan recognizes that the different sectors of society and government have to be involved in not only responding to gender-based violence, but in trying to prevent it from happening. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Palisa. Thank you to all our participants. We really appreciate your contributions. Thank you to our guest speakers. Thank you to all representatives of different offices, different departments, state organizations, civil society, the private sector, our higher institutions, our student reps, and everyone that has engaged us since yesterday. Thank you. We have actually now come to the end of the program. For those who posted their questions in the Q&A section, we have responded to your questions. If there is any question that's not been answered, please, my email address had been posted. Please feel free to touch base with us. And for those of you who will be needing the presentations, if you have registered formally by clicking the RSVP link and giving us your details, when we email the materials, it will automatically come to you. But if you've just used the link, it means that we do not have your details, including your email address. We might need you to please send us a request, and we can assure you that we will be sending the materials to you. So on behalf of the University of KwaZulu-Natal, the law school, and every collaborator, we want to thank you all for joining us in this discussion. I will not call it a debate because we don't want it to sound like, oh, people are just speaking to the walls. But from yesterday till today, we can see that we are being faced with a serious situation that need immediate redress and address and whatever we want to call it. So we thank you once again for being part of this, and a very big thank you to all those who have engaged in putting the ideas together, framing the idea, putting it together, and even signing off. So a very big thank you to Professor Brian MacArthur. We thank also Professor Manigay Reddy from the law school. We also appreciate our institution, the University of KwaZulu-Natal. We appreciate Mr. Mki. We also thank every staff member that has participated and all our partners. We appreciate Honorable Shumen. We also appreciate Honorable Boys. We look forward actually to a productive collaboration in every possible aspect. It's nice to know what the university is doing. It's nice to know what the state is doing. It's nice to know how it affects our students and how they are responding. We also appreciate the director of the HR. We take cognizance of Eleanor, also from the HIV and AIDS department, and every participant, the Department of Justice, the NPA. We had the NPA yesterday. Thank you so much, everyone. If I've left anyone out, please, it's an oversight, and I sincerely apologize. We will now, we've come to the end of the program. Thank you for being patient with us. This is a very broad area. Please feel free to put together additional projects in this area. And if you call on us, certainly we will be there. Thank you. Realibua, merci beaucoup. Vadanki, we appreciate you. Siya bom.